that for the first time in the past 35 years of the modern cartel era, there are actually more organizations operating outside of the cartel structure than in the cartel structure. There's very little product coming from China. You're talking about chemicals?
Yes. Sorry, the precursors.
Well, in 2019, China outlawed the production of fentanyl, and they restricted the precursors. Now, people are using the term precursor incorrectly. The precursor is the compound, the chemical that is precisely the predecessor group. So you take these three precursors, do a reaction, and you'll synthesize the fentanyl. That's not what the Chinese are selling. They're not selling precursors. They're selling the chemicals that are being used to make the precursors. Well, all of those chemicals, none of them are illegal. That's why the Chinese government is saying, what are you talking about? We can't ban stuff that's got normal commercial applications. If you've got a real chemist, or in the case of the guys in Mexico, you got 20-year-olds that are running labs. We had a chemistry professor from USC helping us. Well, that was an enormous barrier to entry. Well, today the kids just go on the dark web. They got what are essentially recipes. So you spend $3,000 in non-regulated chemicals, and you're producing $300,000 in product. So the economics has changed profoundly. And with respect to the Chinese, they're not sending precursors. There's company, first of all, Chapo Guzman's not picking up the phone and calling a guy in China saying, hey, send me some chemicals. It doesn't work that way. The 14K triad has 18 offices around the world. There's going to have half a dozen at least to a dozen shell companies. So the Chinese company, the company in South China, the chemical company that's producing the perfectly legal chemicals, they don't even know it's going to Mexico. You got a shell company out of Hong Kong purchasing the material to ship it to a shell company in Malaysia. The company in Malaysia sends it to Singapore. Singapore sends it to Indonesia. Indonesia sends it to Turkey. Turkey sends it to Spain. And it comes in through Veracruz. The Chinese company has no idea where this is going. And you know that's the case because the United States has not charged any of the chemical companies. They're not doing anything illegal. They've charged the brokers, but the brokers aren't the chemical company. Like in my case, they didn't charge none of the companies. Everything was legal when we started the manufacturing runs. So whether it's the companies in Jersey, the companies in Germany, the companies in California, none of them got prosecuted. They had no idea that this chemistry professor, who had set up a small business, was taking these compounds, each of which were 100% legal, and conducting reactions that is going to be able to produce 3,4-methyl-dioxybenzomethylketone ketone, and then take these other chemicals that are used to make methylamine, and then do a reaction to reduce that to produce the ecstasy. Like you can't hold companies accountable for the conduct of individuals downstream when the individuals operating downstream are very sophisticated. And so by the time it gets to Mexico, you've got a lot of the chemicals are going to Peru. They're coming in through Spain into Veracruz. They're coming into Guatemala. They're coming into Honduras. It's not just a straight shot from China to Colima. And a lot of times what they'll do is when they get to Indonesia, they'll change the labels on them. So they're shipping palm oil. And so by the time it gets to customs in Mexico, even if the customs guy isn't dirty, and most of them, a lot of them are corrupt, but even if they're not corrupt, they're looking at a manifest showing palm oil originating out of Indonesia to ship from Singapore. They're not cracking open every 55-gallon drum on one of those enormous ships. You got 15,000 containers. They're not opening every container. They're not opening every 55-gallon drum inside of every container. So all you need to do is hide 10 containers, 10 55-gallon drums in a sea of thousands. And so the pressure has to be placed on the Mexican government to crack down on the fentanyl production. Because if you're attacking the Chinese side, it's really a needle in a haystack
Yeah.
circumstance.
When you put it like that, now I understand, because I was very curious about like why aren't we doing anything about that? Well, when you put it that way, it makes more sense, and I appreciate that.
Sure.
Last thing, anything else you want to add? Anything you want to say to the show? It's your time, because I'm done with all my questions. I really had a good time.
No, look, as long as we understand that there's been an incentive misalignment for a very long time, and it's been exploited. And up until the Fenny crisis, people were just prepared to live with it. Every administration for the last 30 years has known that the Mexican government has been in bed. Elements of the Mexican government have been in bed with the cartels. And up until the time it's now, taking 100,000 Americans every year. Well, obviously, any administration would have to take steps to stop that. And I think that the current course of conduct is going to actually result in that much more modest goal. One of the big problems that we have is because the economics in Mexico have changed, that for the first time in the past 35 years of the modern cartel era, there are actually more organizations operating outside of the cartel structure than in the cartel structure. The incentives financially prior was based on the fact that you were able to purchase large amounts of product from the Colombians, and you're buying larger amounts, you're going to get a better price. The incentives weighed in favor of membership. Well, today, now that you're able to purchase the precursors, the 100% legal chemicals, for just a few $1,000s to make $400 or $500 well, what do you need the cartel for? So the economics has resulted in there being over 500 drug organizations in Mexico. Sinaloa last year was the biggest cartel with 44. Between Sinaloa and Jalisco, you had 71 member organizations, but there's 500 of them. The two largest cartels capture maybe 12%. And so the issue is much more nuanced and much more complex, which is why you're really going to essentially need to coerce the Mexican government to pressure the large groups to say, hey, status quo ante. And then essentially you're going to have to deputize the cartels because they have to tell all the mom and pops, stop it.
Damn.
Because there are many more organizations outside the cartel structure than in the cartel structure.